And they didn't issue a check until after they were sure there wasn't a dead cat, or they were sure. Some people figured if you, make the cream go further by adding water or whatever. So there was people that were stunned enough not, to be dishonest enough to try that. But of course, it's very easy to take the density. There's a device that floats, and by the amount it sinks, what kind of cream it is. You added water. But anyway, so somewhere, so if you delivered your cream maybe 3 hours later, you stop at the creamery and they're going to check for you. Then you take that check and you buy your bananas and your oranges, but you don't buy potatoes or carrots, or because anything you could grow, you most certainly, the cream check would last if you had a big enough garden and a berry patch, and so on. So we would have this garden that was the pig run. So we alternate. So the way the pig situation was set up, so the pigs had access to last year's garden, and they rooted, and they really reduced the amount of weeds that would come up. And then the next year or two, the pigs would be in the garden. So you had that system with regard to the fertilization, and the pigs would root up the soil to virtually make it a desert, you might say, and so on. But not the potatoes. That garden, the potatoes were grown elsewhere because my father he realized that if he went to the hospitals, I don't know where he got wind of that, he got the contract to supply the 2 hospitals in Prince Albert with potatoes.
Oh, okay, well.
So we grew a large amount of potatoes, which meant that, we had to have the facility to store the potatoes, and we had to, the most brutal relationship I had with my father was when you use a horse, and I would have to ride, bareback on the horse, and my father would be behind with this device that would hill the potatoes. Yeah. Kind of like, so the potatoes would grow. And if the horse stepped on too many potatoes, it created a situation that made my father get angry. And it was always, by the time the end of the day, I would have been screamed at and maybe even kicked occasionally.
Working for parents always a difficult thing, isn't it?
Well, anyway,
how big roughly, like without the potato garden in factor, how big were your gardens? Because you a family of 4, and you guys grew as many vegetables that were able to grow here. So.
I don't know, probably 4 times the floor space of this house, maybe.
So, say,
as you can see, the edge of the bush over there,
you
might say, and maybe about the length of the house.
So about 120 by 80 almost. It's quite the distance, 100 and 120.
Yeah, it happened too that there was a well, so the garden is placed here so that it alternates, and then right near the edge there was a well, and of course the well, it's handy if it's close enough to water the pigs and to water the garden. We didn't often water the garden, but there were certain things you grew that it seemed like it improved by those plants needed twice as much water as what rain would provide.
It's like irrigation trenches type of things? Or?
No, it just pails of water. But there were certain issues that I discovered eventually that if I stayed at home, I would get twice the allowance. That was right off the bat, with the assumption that if you stayed at home on the weekend, that you would do something like weed the garden or pick roots. There's always roots to pick. Every year there was quite a bit of forest in the land that we acquired, and so you didn't, if you cleared an acre or two, that you found that the more acreage that came under cultivation, then of course you grew more stuff. And growing wheat, for example, it seemed in those days it was quite a profitable situation because we did very well. But then again, we did very well because my father was a carpenter, and my older brother was old enough to virtually do everything that my father would have had to do on the farm. So my oldest brother, he did the farming. My father would earn an outside income of building houses and machinery sheds and barns. And so as a result, we eventually ended up being in that circumstance that when we bought any machinery, it was brand new. There was a certain point where you acquired stuff other than new, but my father figured that better machinery, better farming, more profit, and so as a result, the tractors and the combine and so on. The first combine, when wheat was like almost $2 a bushel, the first combine was a self-propelled combine they got was something like $2,500.
Oh.
Well, 25 years later, the same combine was almost $100,000.
Almost 100,000. if not more.
Or if not more, yeah. Well, anyway.
It's funny how it almost seems like it rings true. You see so many people going to, step away from city life and live this kind of, self-sufficient life. And I think one of the scariest things is you can't just magically move from one without experience, without the knowledge, and having an outside income to take care of some of the staples that you're going to need, like the creaming and the potatoes and your father being a carpenter. Yeah, I think it's
well, the issue, it's a common thing for people to say, can you teach me how to live off the land? And that the idea that a lot of people have is that there was a time when man and our Aboriginal people, they sustained themselves from nature, and therefore, as a kind of as a concern and a hedge against things going all awry, surely to be able to live off the land. Well, with us fishing, it took a while that I realized. At first I thought, we grew a lot of chickens and turkey and geese.
Okay.
So occasional turkey ends up roasted. Well, I didn't put two and two together that we didn't seem to be, every Saturday my mother would produce a roast. And, a turkey, that's pretty big. So, when you roast a turkey, the results last for the rest of the week. There's a lot of meat on a turkey. But I didn't even realize this isn't turkey, but it's a jackrabbit. And the jackrabbit, when you roast it, it's about the size of a turkey. And so on Saturdays, and if you sat on top of the grain truck, that's when as the combine is cutting, the rabbits that you don't see because they're in the grain, they become visible as time goes on. So you're sitting on the truck, you're waiting for the signal. You sort of would watch the time or whatever, and my brother would wave, and it means drive up, and so things wouldn't be slowed down. The bin. So you're driving it unloads it without stopping. You don't stop and unload. So you're driving along and unload it. And then when the bin is empty, you sit there and you wait. Well, you don't sit there doing nothing because you put yourself at a nearby corner and you use a scythe and you round the corners because when you go and make a turn,
Yeah.
the thing is to make, and there is grain that's mangled, and it takes time. Well, if you take the scythe and you cut that corner, and then you stack it up in such a way that the combine's going to pick up that what you cut, well, it speeds up the situation, and so I learned how to use a scythe rather skillfully. Whereas where would you? In the old days, you cut all your grain with the scythe.
Yeah.
But in my day, I used the scythe enough to know what that whole issue is about. And so, as a university student working in building campsites and maintaining, those campgrounds and everything, I was the guy that had to teach the other people how to use a scythe, because it's not a given that automatically you know how to use it. And then the other thing we found with our farm, that when there's a certain period where you get the grain in the ground, but the sloughs, that as a result of the snow melting, there's these little lakes all over.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you got to stay away from those lakes because you'll bog down.
Yeah.
And so by the time that the seeding is done, the water has gone, but you can't drive there with a tractor. You just sink, but you can seed it by hand, and then rake it at horses. So the year before, you make sure that there's a lot of these lowlands, but you made sure that you prepared the soil so that in the spring, that the moment that horses can get in there, it just wouldn't be, you wouldn't be able to take advantage of that, provided that you went back to that old method of seeding by throwing it by hand rather than because a seed drill and horses in a seed drill would just sink out of sight and so on. So, but anyway, there was all these experiences which give you a kind of realistic notion of what it's like. So when people come up to say, can I learn how to be able to sustain myself by the use of the wild edible plants? And I'll say, well, the proper answer to that is that there's a transition between you being a person without the background experience like I figure you need.
Mm-hmm.
You got to grow a garden for a while.
Yeah.
And the gardening will give you it goes back to an article. They were heavy into this. They were in a position where they figured that there are a lot of merit to go and be self-sufficient. So they, moved from the city, moved into the country, settled in to try to make do by far, through whatever it is. How do you make a living when you live out in the country? You probably have to commute back and forth to a job. But anyway, they looked at it and they said, oh, we're living here in the country. We're supposed to grow a garden and everything. What does it take to provide 365 meals from the garden? That's your first objective. How do you achieve that? Because that way you got a measurable way, you know where you sit. So they grew whatever, and that objective it was very instructive. From what I read the article, where they were just quite flabbergasted what it took to be able to grow, to prepare the soil, to then preserve the products of the garden. And when you were able to do that, to produce one meal a day for 365 days, you got quite an insight into what it takes to be able to find that in the wilderness, in the wild situation. It is possible, but it takes a very unusual type of setting for you to be able to, in all the years that I have indulged in wilderness skills and so on, I only know of one place where I felt that the vegetation was such that if I made it worthwhile for me, I could prove to people that I could live off of nothing but wild edible plants. Well, probably the odd squirrel or two. from mid-May to mid-September.
That's a bold statement coming
And
from
that's
you.
a very unusual type of